Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Chris. This is episode 3 of Farmers to Raiders, The Mysterious Origins of the Vikings. Been pretty good. They were just showing this technology for how they do their boats, which is really interesting. So anyways, I'm not going to talk, I'm just going to play.
Viking culture did not develop in isolation in Scandinavia. During hundreds of years prior to this time, knowledge had survived and spread from people like the Greek geographer Ptolemaeus, active in the 2nd century AD, or reached the Vikings from the distant court of the Caliph of Baghdad. But the experienced mariner would also use other signs for navigation. He knew that whales would appear when approaching Iceland, and that seabirds in the air indicated he was fairly close to land. Following the flying birds would bring him ashore. In the early 8th century, Irish monks seeking voluntary exile for service to God drifted ashore on the remote island of Iceland. Stories telling of their arrival must have reached the Vikings in Norway and prompted the first wave of emigration to the new land. The Vikings of the North Atlantic were known as the Norse. Middle-ranking chieftains, who were outmaneuvered by others as the kingdoms of Scandinavia slowly formed, saw their chance to rule by finding a new land.
I think that it's useful to distinguish between the mindset of the chieftains who were going out mainly to find some place where they could be chieftain. Almost all of them had lost power struggles someplace further east, either in Norway going to Iceland, or in Iceland then going to Greenland. I think for the other people who are going with the chieftains, basically they were looking for land, they were looking for a better life, they were looking for some place where they could be more prosperous farmers.
They brought their extended families, slaves, and their animals to Iceland. A whole farming community relocated. Many early settlers were also of mixed Norse-Celtic marriages, and some scientists claim East European Slavs were also among the first. At the beginning of the settlement period, Iceland had extensive forests, but within 50 years, the land was cleared, possibly for obtaining timber, but more likely to clear the land for grazing.
Yeah.
Anthropologist Tom McGovern at Hunter College in New York has sifted through the remains of early settlements in Iceland.
Sorry. But yeah, they cleared it for farming, grazing, shipbuilding. Yeah, there's plenty of reasons as to why. I don't know how much of a forest it was, but there's plenty of reasons why. That was in my head, and I was just sitting there like,
It's easy to see the Viking colonizers in North Atlantic coming in and essentially infecting these virgin lands with European insects in themselves and destroying the ecosystem. It's quite clear that when the Vikings moved out across the North Atlantic, they carried with them a set of ideas in their head about what they wanted in terms of an ideal farm. It certainly included pigs, cows, sheep, goats, horses, the whole mix that they had grown up with for thousands of years back in Europe. As they introduced this package into the North Atlantic, it had impacts. It caused deforestation. It caused the loss, in many cases, of grass and opening up of erosion.
But another part of the Viking settlement strategy was that people arriving later were forced to rent their animals from the pioneers, who in turn grew richer and politically stronger. For latecomers, it was also difficult to gain access to fertile land, and many of them probably thought about moving on to new virgin territories. It was still a tough life in Iceland, on the threshold between the old pagan religions and the promises made by Christianity. Some would not give up the heathen traditions, such as eating horse meat, committing infanticide, or sticking to pagan burial traditions. The remote colony had a choice: but had no timber available for houses and ocean-going vessels. A trade pact with Norway, which hinged on the Norwegians' demand that the land adhere to Christendom, was inevitable. But on the Icelandic farms, stories were told of distant lands sighted by brave seafarers. For many young Norse, the stories and sagas created dreams of a different life, but they also described the dangers of going further west.
Bjarni then spoke. Our journey will be thought an ill-considered one, since none of us sailed the Greenland Sea. Despite this, they set sail, and sailed for 3 days, until the land had disappeared under the horizon. They were beset by winds from the north and fog. For many days they didn't know where they were sailing.
Wow.
Eric the Red, a low-ranking chieftain, fled west after slaying a man in Iceland. His was the first attempt to settle a new land further west. After rough times in the pack ice, they were rewarded by a beautiful sight. In the years to come, Eric the Red, now the highest-ranking ruler of a new land, sold his concept of a Greenland to followers, creating an exodus out of Iceland, which was torn by religious and political disagreements. But the first convoy to sail to Greenland was hit hard. Of the 25 ships leaving Iceland, only 14 made it to Eric the Red's settlement. His promise of a Greenland was not a lie. 1,000 years ago, the climate was much warmer than it is today, and in sheltered fjords, the forests grew tall. Grazing areas were good, and soon some 3,000 people occupied hundreds of new farmsteads along the southwest coast of Greenland. If and
What's the population of Iceland now? In Greenland? Just curious.
when the ships reached the southernmost tip of Greenland, they could find shelter away from the pack ice. Today, a group of Danish archaeologists are trying to paint a picture of Herjolfsnes, the community that grew here. They do not find a lot of remains, but one unearthed discovery is especially interesting.
What we believe to have found here is a Norse boathouse. It is a ship-shaped building, no wall towards the sea, so we believe it's a house that they have pulled up their boats maybe during the winter so that they had shelter for storms and things like that. And we believe this to be one of many Norse boathouses in Greenland, so this is just the start of a bigger project.
Maybe this is also the shipyard, the wharf, where battered ships could be repaired before attempting ongoing journeys further west.
Huh. Okay.
For the Vikings, this was a new world, and they had yet to learn how to make the most of it. Many things were new and surprising.
Is that the indigenous people?
The Inuit and the Norse arrived in Greenland about the same time. The Inuit arrived from the north, crossing over from Arctic Canada. The meeting was probably a surprise to both. And even though there were stories of hostilities, the encounter was most likely friendly. Unlike the Norse, The Inuit already knew which Arctic resources were there. Rope made out of sealskin, ivory from walrus tusks, and fur from seals and polar bear. The ivory and rope in particular made highly prized trading goods that made the Greenland colony flourish and made European traders willing to maintain regular contacts. But Christianity grew stronger, and even the pagan chieftain Eric the Red was forced to build a small church for his wife. And we can only guess what was on the bargaining table. But the Norse, true to their trading reputation, also made Christianity a source of income, renting their small churches to settlers who needed consecrated earth for their dead.
I have decided to name a new heir. I'm your heir.
I never
Where's
liked.
duty? Where is sacrifice?
I never cared for Game of Thrones.
Dead.
Sorry.
Bjarni, a daring young Norseman, once lost his way at sea and drifted in fog to a land he didn't know. But he was sure it wasn't the Greenland he had heard of. His story of an unnamed land sparked the interest of other Norse sailors. One of them was Eric the Red's son, Leif Erikson.
Okay.
The currents and wind patterns close to Greenland favor a trip to North America. The ever-present fog is a problem, but by riding the currents, a ship would slowly approach Baffin Island. Leif Erikson called this barren land Helluland, meaning slabland, because of its stony appearance. They sailed on. To the south they encountered forests, and the further south they went, the taller were the trees. He called the place Markland, the land of trees. Encouraged by what they saw, they continued.
They spent 2 days at sea with northeasterly winds before they saw land. They sailed towards it and came to an island. In the fine weather, they found dew on the grass that they collected in their hands and drank, and thought they had never tasted anything as sweet.
Archaeologist Birgitta Wallace has followed in Leif Erikson's footsteps, finding the remains of his and other Norse expeditions to North America. She knows the Vikings called their newfound land Vinland, the land of wine, and she is convinced that the name reflects the finds they made.
Looking for Vinland, I think I really like to turn the map upside down and remember we are coming from Greenland. And here is Lonesome Meadows in northern Newfoundland where I worked. And I think Vinland is this, all the coast around the Gulf of St. Lawrence.
The only remains of a Norse settlement found in North America, at present-day Lonsey Meadows, is most likely Leif Erikson's original camp, as described in the sagas. There has been a long debate over the accuracy of the sagas' accounts. The stories were written down more than 200 years after the original events took place, and details have no doubt been lost or changed through.
There's another book that was written a few hundred years after someone's death.
Oral storytelling over time. But enough can be verified through archaeology to allow for a number of conclusions.
The men dominated, but some women were along to do what was normal female chores, such as cleaning, cooking, maintenance of clothing.
We can also guess that the exploration team consisted of a strong leader, skilled craftsmen, and a number of slaves.
I'm going to stop it there. Interesting. I'm interested with the Vikings. I just don't really, not the Minnesota Vikings. I don't care for them. The Vikings themselves have always been kind of interesting. Leif Erikson's a name that I knew, that I would think we all know, actually. It was a stupid comment. But I'm going to go and end this here. And like and subscribe to the channel, or one day you're going to be sweeping and you're going to get this terrible pain in your lower back, and it's going to have somebody come up behind you with the sickle and just cut you right in half. And that's how you're going to go out. Your final words were, I should have liked and subscribed. Ugh. So have a good day, have a good night.